How do the statistics of the most effective Luftwaffe machine look? 20 to 50% non-returnable losses. Life expectancy was measured in weeks. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 produced the top 3 aces. It became the undisputed backbone of the Luftwaffe. The engine hum echoed outside the barracks. Inside, an officer wiped the chalkboard clean. Old names vanished, new names appeared. Over 100% losses in a single squadron. The roster died, recruits arrived. They died too. This extreme attrition rate among fighter pilots mirrored the exact survival statistics of frontline infantry penal battalions clearing minefields. The lists were rewritten anew. An engineering triumph of aviation designers became the primary internal executioner of Luftwaffe flight schools. The origins of these non-recoverable casualty lists trace back to secretive design bureaus of the early 1930s. Germany required a modern aerial platform, and the result was a sleek, all-metal monoplane with fully retractable landing gear. The pilot heard the heavy click of the narrow cockpit canopy locking overhead, isolating him within a revolutionary machine. However, the aerodynamic refinement that defined this aircraft introduced a fatal mechanical flaw. The unusually narrow track of the landing gear transformed routine touchdowns into deadly gambles. The moment the tires touched the dirt airstrips, the airframe often lost its delicate balance and flipped violently onto its back. Over 2,000 German pilots perished due to ground handling accidents alone throughout the conflict. This staggering death toll on the runway actually exceeded the entire flying roster of the British Royal Air Force before the Battle of Britain, which stood at roughly 1,500 men. Revolutionary aerodynamics provided unparalleled air superiority at high altitudes, yet the narrow wheel track slaughtered aviators upon descent. Despite this internal bleeding of personnel, the aircraft officially entered active service in 1937. In the skies of Spain, the Bf 109 completely eradicated older Soviet biplanes from the airspace. A pre-war career pilot paints a 20th victory mark on his fuselage. During the First World War, 5 downed planes earned a pilot the title of ace. Now, 20 is a baseline. Those who survived the narrow landing gear on training bases seized total control of the skies. They projected power from North Africa to the Eastern Front. The first generation of Luftwaffe pilots mastered their aircraft completely. They converted raw speed into air superiority. Most Allied fighters could not match their climb rates or their pre-war tactical training. The continent belonged to them. The real test lay ahead. Squadrons turned toward the English Channel, 640 kilometers per hour in a straight line. Beneath the cowlings beat a demanding heart, the Daimler-Benz engine. The Gustav model saw continuous development. Pilots wrestled with massive physical force. 12 liquid-cooled cylinders inside a narrow nose. Vibrations tore through the metal seat. Down the spine. Speed climbed. 560 kilometers per hour. High altitude changed everything. Performance dropped. But raw mechanical speed could never guarantee a pilot's survival against incoming threats. Armament required radical evolution. 2,000 horsepower. Why would an aircraft flown by the finest Luftwaffe aces later kill a third of its own pilots on the airfields? The transformation began with the installation of heavy 30mm cannons and rockets against bomber formations. By 1945, this interceptor killed thousands of its pilots during landing. The evolution originally started as a desperate attempt to maximize firepower. Engineers centralized the weapon systems to create a tighter shot grouping for the pilot. They removed the wing-mounted guns and installed a single 20 or 30mm cannon firing directly through the propeller hub. 2 13mm heavy machine guns sat right above the engine block. This concentrated the mass along the center line, giving the pilot accuracy without worrying about convergence distance. By the later stages of the conflict, these burdened aircraft would become easy prey the moment they encountered nimble enemy escorts. Protecting interceptor units from heavy bombers turned a maneuverable machine into a large target. Adding 20 and 30 millimeter gun pods under the wings introduced hundreds of kilograms of dead weight. This weight increase severely altered the center of gravity. The controls became unresponsive for the exhausted men in the cockpit. The extra weapons doomed the young pilots in any turning dogfight. Allied escort fighters outmaneuvered the sluggish machines and shot them down. 600 kilometers. That was the maximum operational radius of the baseline fighter over English territory. The crisis of heavy weapons temporarily faded before a deadlier threat during the Battle of Britain. The physical volume of the main fuel tank. Pilots had exactly 10 to 15 minutes for actual combat. Engineers initially built the aircraft as a short-range interceptor. Its internal tank held 400 liters. That fuel vanished rapidly at full combat throttle. Mechanics eventually attached a 300-liter drop tank. This modification pushed the theoretical range up to 1,000 kilometers. But the core trap remained unchanged. Escorting bombers over London became a psychological torture of constantly watching the instrument panel. A pilot checked the fuel gauge. The low-level warning indicator blinked. He broke off the engagement. He pulled the control stick and turned his aircraft hard toward France. The English Channel spans 33 kilometers at its narrowest point. That geographic reality demanded a minimum of 5 minutes of steady flight just to cross the open water. Often, the needle hit empty far from the coast. The engine sputtered. It choked on fumes. The 12 cylinders died with a heavy mechanical clank above the gray waves. Without power, the heavily armed fighter turned into a useless glider, plummeting toward the freezing sea. No rescue vessels waited below. Many crews never even reached the water. They crash-landed in British fields and became prisoners of war. Royal Air Force pilots held a distinct operational advantage. They fought directly over their own bases. They landed, refueled, and climbed back into the fight. German airmen operated against a strict physical boundary. Every maneuver consumed fuel. Every high-speed pursuit cost precious seconds. British ground stations utilized early radar to detect incoming bomber formations. Controllers scrambled early model Spitfires and Hurricanes to intercept the invaders right at the coast. The geographic disadvantage steadily drained the attackers' resources. Although the German interceptors inflicted heavy casualties on the defenders, the daily attrition rate remained unsustainable. Highly trained airmen drowned in the Channel. The untouchable aura of the Luftwaffe broke. Veteran fighter units took severe damage. Germany lost air superiority by October 1940. How did Hans-Joachim Marseille achieve 158 victories in the desert? While empty fuel tanks dropped pilots into the English Channel, the North African environment killed them differently. His fighter easily outperformed British P-40 aircraft, at least until sand destroyed the engine. Fine desert sand choked air intakes and jammed internal mechanical parts, while summer temperatures routinely exceeded 40 degrees Celsius inside the unpressurized cockpit. Marseille flew combat missions in this theater throughout 1942. He shot down 158 enemy aircraft, yet he ultimately died striking his own machine. A mechanical failure forced him to jump, and his chest smashed directly against the vertical stabilizer. A single 7.7 millimeter bullet strikes metal. It severs the liquid cooling line. The fluid bleeds out into the cold wind. While elite aces perished in accidents, ordinary pilots faced a new British threat above Europe. The Spitfire Mark V matched German aircraft in combat performance. Luftwaffe pilot losses grew daily. Preparing a single fighter pilot required a minimum of 200 flight hours. Germany lacked both time and fuel for replacements. Engineers rushed to armor the cockpits. They installed thick armored glass. Mechanics bolted heavy steel plating directly behind the seat and fitted a self-sealing fuel tank. The steel shielded the pilot from incoming shrapnel. But this desperate physical defense meant nothing. The designers left one major external vulnerability. If machine gun fire punctured that exposed pipe, the flight ended. The engine boiled over in seconds. Surviving a boiling engine meant nothing if the landing killed you. Why did huge numbers of these fighters never face the enemy? The extremely narrow wheel attachment turned simple landings into catastrophes. Engineers bolted the main gear directly to the fuselage. This allowed fast wing replacement in combat. But the track width measured less than 2 meters. On unpaved dirt strips, this narrow stance made the machine highly unstable. Tires hit dirt. Engine torque violently pulled the airframe left. The pilot fought the rudder pedals. The nose pointed high. They saw nothing. Forward visibility dropped to 0. Checking the path ahead required constant zigzagging along the entire runway length. One tiny mistake meant instant disaster. Metal groaned. The strut snapped. The wing dug deep. The fighter flipped. The time-saving design became a lethal trap for young recruits. It broke them before combat. A post-war investigation calculated the final toll caused by this specific engineering flaw. Wrecked in taxiing and landing. 1/3 of all produced machines. Officially, they were celebrated as heroes with record-breaking kill counts. In reality, the Eastern Front became a one-way ticket, where hundreds of downed machines meant a strict ban on returning home. Pilots set unprecedented aviation records here. Yet by the spring of 1945, command would order them to physically ram enemy bombers. The United States Army Air Forces pulled their top aviators out of active combat. An ace like Richard Bong hit 40 victories and received a ticket back to American flight schools. He transferred his combat tactics to an incoming generation of rookies. The Luftwaffe operated on a different protocol. Germany faced a severe deficit of trained aviators. High command canceled all frontline rotations. A pilot stayed assigned to his combat wing indefinitely. You flew until you died, or until you crashed, or until shrapnel grounded you. Even severe injuries offered no escape. A pilot left the hospital ward. He walked directly back to the flight line. Mechanics strapped him in. The cramped fighter cockpit smelled of fresh medical iodine and hot gun oil. He grabbed the flight stick with recovering hands. The canopy closed. He took off again. This personnel policy created an isolated group of rare survivors. Erich Hartmann, Gerhard Barkhorn, and Gunther Rahl spent years locked inside these exact cockpits. 928 confirmed kills between just 3 pilots. They achieved this massive tally through thousands of consecutive daily sorties. The final score reflected deep combat experience, but it primarily exposed the complete absence of a reserve fighter force. Only a tiny fraction of these veterans lived to see the final surrender. Early in the invasion, German squadrons hunted obsolete biplanes across the open steppes. But the target environment rapidly evolved. The Soviet aviation industry reorganized its manufacturing centers deep behind the Ural Mountains. They replaced their heavy initial losses. They rolled out modern monoplane interceptors. Fresh squadrons of Yak-1 and MiG-3 fighters entered the combat zone. How do you stop a high-altitude bomber formation? A high-speed attack through the crossfire of 13 machine guns. While Soviet fighters advanced eastward, defenders over Germany faced the B-17 Flying Fortress. The interceptors climbed for hours. Cabins froze. Temperatures dropped below -40 degrees. Bombers flew at 25,000 feet. The B-17 formations flew tight. 13 heavy machine guns guarded each ship. Gunner turrets tracked every movement. 50 caliber rounds shattered engine blocks. Crisscrossing tracers flared bright. They formed a dense wall, a solid grid of fire right before the windshield. Pilots shoved the stick forward. They dove straight in. The psychological strain was immense. Nerves snapped. Men broke. Survival meant aiming for the cockpit. Survival meant breaking the formation apart. Heavy weapons demanded a steep price. Extra armor plates added weight. 30mm cannons slowed the airframes. The fighters lost agility. They became sluggish, flying bricks. Bombers burned. The tactic worked briefly. Then the escorts arrived. Drop tanks extended Allied reach. Fuel limits vanished. The heavy defenders were exposed. They could not turn fast. They could not dive away. They were slow targets now. The P-51 Mustang crossed the border with 650 caliber machine guns, hunting the heavy interceptors across the continent and escorting the bombers deep into German airspace. An 18-year-old recruit grips the control stick of an aging fighter. Behind him is only basic flight training. The veterans capable of surviving dogfights with Mustangs were gone. British pilots entered combat with over 300 hours of flight time. Late-war German conscripts launched to intercept with less than 50 hours of practice. The outcome was fatal. Early morning, January 1, 1945. Teenage rookies sat waiting inside freezing cockpits. The deafening roar of 900 engines started simultaneously at dawn. Operation Bodenplatte commenced. The massive formation held their aircraft at extremely low altitudes. Pilots skimmed just above the winter terrain to maintain stealth. They targeted 17 Allied air bases scattered across Belgium and the Netherlands. The initial dawn strike worked. German squadrons caught the enemy off guard and destroyed hundreds of grounded aircraft. But the sky dictated a different price. The Allies replaced their shattered airframes in days, while the attacking force lost its final veteran flight instructors to anti-aircraft fire. The offensive collapsed. Remaining fighter units never recovered from this single morning. The Air Force sacrificed dozens of irreplaceable pilots in just 24 hours. What final chapter awaited the highest-scoring squadrons? A voluntary ramming attack above Germany. With the last instructors gone, command possessed only one remaining resource: spending the lives of their aviators. On the 7th of April, 1945, approximately 180 fighters launched as Sonderkommando Elbe. Their objective was a direct collision with heavy bombers. Unlike Japanese kamikaze flights, these airmen received formal orders to parachute away after the impact. Yet, at a closing speed of 800 kilometers per hour, surviving the crash was physically impossible. By spring, the aviation network collapsed into isolated fragments. A few pilots brought down bombers, but escorting aircraft destroyed the majority before they reached the target zones. The final sorties launched over the bombed-out streets of Berlin, flying without any expectation of a safe return. Fuel was gone,